RugbyRenegade.com, the #1 online strength and conditioning program for rugby. Are you ready to get bigger, stronger, fitter, and faster and dominate your opposition? Welcome to the Rugby Renegade Podcast, where we build machines.
Hello and welcome to the Rugby Renegade Podcast. Today's episode is sponsored by Pro Athlete Supplementation. Check them out at pas-nutrition.co.uk for all your supplementation needs. And don't forget that subscribers to the Rugby Renegade program get a 40% discount on retail prices. Yes, welcome back to the Rugby Renegade Podcast. This is episode 52. My name is Jamie Bain and today I interview Jim Wendler, world-renowned strength and conditioning coach and lifter in his own right and creator of the 531 program, which we've used variations of in our online subscription program. And Jim is currently working in high school football, and it's really good insights into kind of how he's adapted his 531 program and his approach with, you know, the athletes he's dealing with, because that's what it's all about, getting the most out of your athletes, not, you know, creating the world's best program. It's adapting on the fly. So tons of take homes, and of course, as always, give it a listen and let us know what you think. Hi Jim, welcome to the Rugby Renegade Podcast. Great to have you on. Why don't we start by you telling us a bit about your background, how you got into strength and conditioning, and who you've worked with and the sports you've been involved in.
Well, I started lifting weights when between my 7th and 8th grade year. I was, I'm 44 years old now, so I was kind of brought up in the era of, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and being strong was being awesome. It's kind of like, I imagine, like when you're like a 7-year-old kid and you see a giant set of boobs and you're like, you don't know what it is, but you're like, I don't know what that is, but I want that, When I was a kid, well, it's true. Like, you're like, I don't know what the fuck those things are, but man, they're awesome. And as a kid, I was just obsessed with being stronger. And, it did take a genius to figure out you need to lift weights to get there. So I pestered my dad for like 2 or 3 years before he let me do anything. And he took me aside and said, well, if you start this, you can't stop. My dad was kind of the old school kind of guy. If you start something, you end something. Oh, you don't quit. And it's been like that ever since. I've been obsessed with it. So initially I started lifting primarily just to help sport my football. I knew I wasn't the most talented person in the world. At a very young age, I could figure that out. I mean, I don't think anyone who is even remotely smart can look at a guy like Barry Sanders or Roger. These are all football players, but, great Walter Payton, great football players, and think that I knew I wasn't going to be that. And so I knew I needed I needed something to get me ahead. And I knew if I was just bigger, stronger, in better shape, I could, outclass a little bit more talent is the best way to say it. So, so my first, 10 years was all dedicated to getting better for football. And then it was just obsessive about it. And, back then I had a really awesome coach in high school who taught me a lot. But that was all I had really access to. So I did a lot of learning on my own. And one of the great things that he did, and his name is Darren Llewellyn, he's my track coach, my throws coach, is, are you still there?
Yep.
Hello? Okay, I got all these fucking phone calls here. Anyway, to make a long story short, Darren never really told me exactly what to do. I mean, he helped guide me. He made me question a lot of things, and, he made me defend my position of why I wanted to do something. And so it was a real learning experience for me. It wasn't just me doing whatever I was told. He made me think about it, and he let me fuck up a lot, And I think that's super important. And the best story I always tell about Darren was when I first went into the weight room. I went into my high school weight room. Now, granted, I wasn't in high school at the time. My dad was a teacher, so I was surrounded by high school athletes. When you're, 8th grader, 7th grade, that was 8th grade. It was very intimidating. And they're all football players. They're all huge dudes. And Darren never said a word. He took me aside and told me, hey, you might want to start doing some straight leg deadlifts. And then another year went by, and then he finally talked to me. And I asked him, like my senior year, I'm like, you never talked to me at all my first year, like once. And he said, well, I had to make sure you're willing to commit. because I've helped so many people over the years that, I give them all this time and all this energy, and then they quit after 2 weeks. I had to make sure you're serious. And that really stuck with me. You have to kind of earn the right to be taught. And so from there, I went to college. I played football in college. Again, I had a great strength coach in Dan Worth, who, he was incredibly understanding because I was incredibly hard-headed. So he let me do my own thing a little bit here and there. He was open for, well, if you want to try it, man, go ahead. So he wasn't totally authoritarian about, it's his way or the highway. And I really appreciate that because I see it now from my point of view. It would have driven me nuts. So after football was over, that's when I started going knee deep into powerlifting. And then I did that for 5 years, And then once I left powerlifting, it was, I kind of had to reevaluate some stuff. And that's when I started really kind of coming in my own. And so I started playing around with different stuff and trying to figure out programming and really trying to understand like when I was in high school and college, I was insanely strong and I didn't have any of these fancy programs. I'm like, well, what did I do? And that's where I started developing the 5-3-1 program because I was like, well, this is kind of what I did. I just didn't really know what I was doing. And I did that. I just kind of did the online thing and I helped people here and there in the gym. And then eventually I started volunteering at my high school here in small town London, Ohio, and for the football team. And it just completely changed my life. Being around, 50 or 60 kids, and just changing the entire outlook of the program has been amazing. Just by getting our kids a little stronger, a little faster, and a little better shape. We went from being a 3-win team one season to making the playoffs the last 2 years and just beating the shit out of people. And I see what a positive difference it can make. It made a big difference in my life, especially in the high school. I always feel like the high school is like the last place to make a real big difference in someone's life. They're still being able, you still mold them a little bit. So that's what I've been doing. So, besides writing books and doing all this stuff online, I've been helping the local football team, and it's been the best thing I've ever done by far.
Yeah.
And it's the most rewarding thing I've ever done. And for the first time in my life, someone else's training is more important than mine. So, and I don't feel like such a selfish asshole all the time.
Yeah. So. No, that's cool. That's cool. Now, you obviously touched on 5-3-1, and that's probably kind of what you're known for, the main program you promote. So let's talk about, you kind of touched on how you developed it, but maybe sort of explain briefly what it is. Don't have to go into percentages or anything, but then how you kind of developed it based on what you were doing previously.
The big reason why I started it was I wanted to go back to kind of what I did when I was younger, and I didn't want to think about anything. At the time, my first son was being born. I was working a ton. I just wanted to go in the weight room, know what I had to do, and just get the shit done and just have a good time and not really think too much about training. So in order to do this, you have to think about training a lot, which I guess is the irony of the whole situation. So it took about 2 years of, fucking around and screwing things up until I figured out kind of the basics of it. But that's pretty much how it started, was just being selfish about it. Like, I'm tired of trying to figure out this and that and this thing and this thing. I'm just going to have a basic plan and go in. And I started having like a ridiculous amount of success. I had, lost about 30 pounds, 40 pounds from when I was powerlifting, but I was now setting all-time PRs. And I was like, man, this is something. And so I started bringing some of my friends in that were training. And I'm like, you want to? And they saw it, and they're like, hey, show me what to do. And so I experimented on them. I effed up a lot. I did some really good things, and that's where the program really started taking off. I had no idea it was going to be as big as it actually became. Because again, it was just like, well, and it seemed too simple. And there's been obviously things that I developed over the years. I started working with more people, and I realized, well, we need to change this or change that. But the basic principles that I laid out, I have 4 original principles, and I added a 5th. Many years later, I said, as long as I follow these things, I'm going to be okay. So it was never really about the sets and reps. It was about having a basic plan that followed solid principles. And it's just like anything in life. If you have a plan and it's based on solid principles, you're going to get there no matter what. So does that make sense to you?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So that's how it all started. Again, it had no grand plan of becoming bigger than I thought it would be. But I'm sitting here today and very happy. So there you go.
That's cool. So you mentioned there that you experimented and you tweaked with it a bit. Now, what are some of the changes or tweaks you made for working with athletes?
Well, I guess part of it is I should probably say that when I work with, I have a high school athlete, and even the high school athletes, there's a massive difference between a kid who's been in the program for 4 years and a kid who's in 8th grade who's just starting out. But in general, we'll just take maybe a kid who's been in the program for a year. One thing we do with our main lifts for the football team are the bench press, the squat, and the trap bar deadlift. We don't train those ridiculously heavy. We train those what I call for power. And there's a couple reasons why we do this, but for a younger athlete, I would rather that they don't have enough experience under the bar to get away from a bad or heavy lift. Okay. So let's say you're squatting X amount of pounds and something starts feeling a little wonky. If you've got 20 years experience under the bar, you can get yourself out of it without getting hurt. With a 16-year-old kid, that's not the case. So I said, you know what, I'm just going to remove any doubt that they're going to get hurt. We're going to lower the weights a little bit. So we always keep the weights on the main lifts to be very fast. I want every total control. I say control probably 8,000 times a training session. I just want control. I want mastery of the lift. So that's probably the number one thing. Number two thing is we use this is where I got it from, ironically, from a rugby coach. And I don't know the guy's name. I read the article and I was fascinated. We don't use a lot of exercises, even with the assistants. We use very few. And there's two reasons why we do this. One is the kids aren't massively experienced where they need to change anything. They need to learn a few basic lifts, and this includes the assistants, and master those. Number two, and this is the most important thing, is when we do the same lifts over and over again, we can get stronger at them, but more importantly, we don't get sore. And not getting sore is a huge thing, especially during the in season. Okay. So we can now train very heavy during the in season and not have to deal with the repercussions of like, oh, my ass is killing me, my legs are tired. Our bodies are completely used to all these lifts and we're fine. So most of our off-season training is mostly geared to get ready for the in-season training. And it's a little opposite of what most people do. Most people just kind of train in the off-season. And I want our kids stronger in the in-season than they are in the off-season. What's more important, being stronger in June when you're just farting around or being stronger when you're actually playing the game? And it's always you want to be stronger playing the game. So that's how I kind of scheduled everything. So we use very few exercises, which I think is a little bit different than most people do. Let's see what else. I'm trying to think. I have a whole presentation on this. We don't set records, really, meaning I don't have like a record board. I don't chart I don't have like a 300-pound bench press club or anything like that. And the reasoning behind that is I don't want to chase numbers for the sake of chasing numbers. I just want the kid to get stronger, meaning just because a kid doesn't bench 300 pounds doesn't mean his training is worthless. If that kid used to bench 50 pounds and now he benches 150, to me, that's just as important because that's my whole goal is not to necessarily get them, quote, strong, is to get them stronger than they were before. And now I never have the kids chasing anything. It's usually, either for the coach's ego or for the player's ego. And I just think that's the wrong thing to do, especially at this level. Where, who gives a shit how much people one rep max when they're an athlete? Mm. So I'll give you an example is, the way that we our starters, like we do on our bench press day, we do dumbbell squats and straight leg deadlifts in between all of our bench press sets. And most of our kids can handle 5 to 8 sets of 10 reps on the dumbbell squat with a 115 to 150 pound dumbbell. That's pretty awesome.
Hmm.
And that's, just going through the steps, kicking ass, having a good time. It's not like a balls out training session. So we kind of use the assistance lifts to build what we call muscle building armor. Obviously it builds strength too. So, and the third thing that we do a little differently is I call it, we body build the upper and athlete the lower. And what that means is we are looking for strong, fast, explosive legs, and we're looking for like a bodybuilder style upper body. And the reason behind this is one of the big things is one of the best ways to get stronger is obviously to build muscle, but especially in young kids, their upper bodies are so deficient. So I don't worry about how much they bench press. I just want them to build muscle. It helps build some cushion. It helps make them feel better. Everyone wants to look a little jacked. So I'm not too concerned with how much weight they lift in their upper body lifts, as long as they're getting bigger and stronger, or getting bigger, and thus as a result they'll get stronger. So it's, the other thing you have to understand too, from a strength perspective, the bench press is always the last thing to get stronger, and it usually has to do with muscle mass, both in the upper back, the lats, obviously in the whole upper body, triceps, shoulders and stuff. So I don't really want the kids to chase numbers and get all depressed about that. So we just body build the hell out of the upper body. So
yeah,
there you go.
I like it. Makes a lot of sense, especially with that sort of group of athletes you're working with. You obviously know your athletes and have tweaked it to them.
Yeah, the other thing you have to understand is every field athlete or court athlete, or however you want to talk about it, they, even in the professional level, they are beginner lifters. They're not, just because they're advanced in their sport doesn't mean they're advanced in the weight room.
Yeah.
And that's another thing I think people get a little wrong too. You can have a tremendous basketball player, for example, but is he a super advanced squatter or deadlifter? No. He just needs to do a few basic things, and eventually he may move on to another level. But you're never going to get a sport athlete who's going to be an advanced lifter, because if he did that, then it would take away from his sport development. It just doesn't work like that.
Yeah. No, and very good point.
People use a lot of advanced modalities when they don't really need to.
Yeah.
You want to use, I want to use the least amount of work to get the most amount of effect. So especially in the weight room, Yeah. They got other shit they got to do.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, and especially in our sport, in rugby, there's so many different, depending on what position you are, so many different skills that they need to master and spend time on, that there's so little training time for it, or energy to recover. Yeah,
and I'm not in the business of skill development. That's the other thing. My job is to make them physically better. The skill, the sport coaches are what work. That's how they work on their skill, and that's one of the big things I tell the kids too. This just gives you a chance to get better on the field. This is not a guarantee. But if we make their legs stronger, if we make them a little bit faster, they make them a little more durable, make them in better shape, and they make them more mobile, we can get them in their body in the right position, so to speak, to do the skill work better. But that's not my job, is skill development.
Yeah.
I don't, make them, block with a barbell on their back. That's fucking pointless.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, definitely. Now, going back more to 5-3-1, maybe the traditional model. What are some of the biggest difficulties people have with it that you found you've had to sort of help them through?
I think the biggest thing is putting their ego aside.
I thought that might be it.
Yeah, and that's normal. I mean, I did it too. But when you put your ego aside, and I see it with the kids all the time, if we found that you can get insanely strong by not using terribly heavy weights all the time.
Yeah.
And so once the kids kind of get a taste of that, they can understand it. My first 6 months was difficult. You had to convince them. But after maybe, I think, we had a couple guys really kind of buy in, and everyone's like, holy shit, look how much difference, look at how different they look. Their weights are just flying up. It's like, man, they were, crushing this weight today. 3 months ago, they couldn't do anything. And so we had a few kids really buy in that I kind of helped sell it, but it's still a little bit of a sell program. You still have to sell it a little bit, and I'm okay with people not believing it. Because I see what happened when applied correctly. I see what happened. I'm just not really terribly interested in defending something, if that makes sense. If people don't want to follow it, that's cool. I'm okay with it. And I think I learned an important lesson in life. I think when I was younger, not so much when I did the program, but, maybe when I was 20, 25 years old, if I was doing something and someone said, this is wrong, I'd get all defensive and say, what the hell, this is why. And now I'm like, that's fine. You can disagree with me. I'm comfortable in my position. And I noticed that the people who scream the loudest and defy, they just believe the least, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah.
So if you could see, and it's hard to explain, but just the difference in our community and the difference in the quality of our football is unbelievable. And now I'm not the only reason why. I mean, there's been a lot of other things that have happened, but watching our team just decimate people, it's like, holy shit, we're doing something right.
Yeah, that's great.
So, yeah, I should say there's one more thing we do a little differently too, is we don't kill the kids at all. We train hard, but our kids aren't puking every day. They're not missing weights. I want the kids to have a lot of success in the weight room.
Yeah.
And so I did a video on Instagram that people seem to like. I spent some time looking at some training videos on YouTube, like, so-and-so's training facility. And they were all, screaming and hollering, and we're grinding it out, and there's no off days, all that stuff. I'm like, man, we have a lot of easy days, I'm not like that's. Sometimes you can't bury your kids in the sand.
Yeah.
And I think part of it is we have our high school only has like 400 kids in it. Okay. We can't afford. If I had 200 kids in the team, I can afford to make some of the kids really tired because there's always a kid that can play next to them. So if the first team guy goes out, we can replace him with the second team guy, and there's not much of a difference. But here we don't have that. We need all the kids healthy and ready. So, I mean, if you're burying the kids in the sand all the time physically, it just doesn't work itself out very well. So, there you go.
Yeah.
And that doesn't make good Instagram fodder.
No, exactly, and it has to be good for Instagram. So, I guess one of the other questions I'm pretty sure you've probably heard a lot, and is how do you incorporate power cleans into 5-3-1?
Well, I don't do them. I don't do them with our athletes.
Yeah.
There's probably a couple reasons why I'll give. One, I don't feel comfortable coaching them to a large group. You have to understand that training people one-on-one is different than training 60 kids with one guy.
Yeah.
So it gets a little hairy. Number two is we have kids who come in who can't do a bodyweight squat. So what the fuck do I care if they can move a barbell? We have to teach kids how to jump. We have to teach kids how to land first, which is huge. I spent 30 minutes yesterday teaching 7th and 8th graders how to land. We also have to teach them basic gymnastic stuff. This is stuff that maybe 30, 40 years ago we didn't have to deal with. Doing cartwheels, doing rolls, just body awareness stuff.
Yeah.
So it was one of those things like, well, what are they going to get more out of? Doing PVC cleans or, learning where their body is in space and kind of strengthen their legs so they can actually do a bodyweight squat. And you think that's a joke, but it's not a joke. So then we do an insane amount of jumping here too, which I would consider dynamic work. So we do jumping, we do bounding and stuff like that. So I think that kind of covers the base.
How do you structure that sort of stuff, Jim?
We start, obviously we have a general warm-up that we do, both mostly dynamic stuff like leg swings, cartwheels, forward rolls, stuff like that to get the body ready. We do a little bit of static stretching for the hips and glutes, that's a big difference in our squat technique. If we just kind of stretch those, which I know is heresy. God forbid you static stretch, but you know what? I'm not I'll always, a friend of mine, Alan Cosgrove, had a funny saying. He's like, he went over to Thailand and watched the Thai boxers and, Muay Thai.
Yep.
He's like, those guys will stretch for 2 hours and kick your fucking head off. So you think it's making them slower? So it's just about making there's good and bad. There's shades of gray and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And if I can get our kids in better position by doing something, I'm not going to throw it out because the current bullshit says so. So I'm willing to do that. And the kids like to do it, which is another big thing. What was the other thing? Oh, and so we always start with a general warm up and do all this stuff. And then we're obviously moving our bodies through space. And then we always start, before we actually start a lift, we always do some kind of jumping. Now, granted, it's tailored to the kids. Meaning if I have a 7th and 8th grade kid who can't really jump, we teach them how to land first. We had a kid here who could jump on like a 62-inch box. It's the most insane thing you've ever seen.
Yeah.
And so he was very strong. So he can do something a little more advanced. But every workout starts with something kind of explosive. And obviously box jumps are probably the easiest thing. They're the least amount of stress because you're not really landing like a depth jump or a drop jump. And we do some bounding over low hurdles where we're just looking at contact time and looking over total body control, and which is huge. I'm a big fan of having control because if you have that, you can control your body in any way. It's like Louis Simmons once said, you have to be fast, you have to learn how to be slow and be under control. And only then will you be able to apply the force rapidly where you need it to be. So I learned a lot from that. Like, if you're going to teach a kid how to squat, he should be able to hold different positions during the squat. He shouldn't just dive bomb.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is just kind of remedial physical fitness. And I think a lot of people put that well before, or they kind of forget about it. They just expect everyone to be, Soviet era 1970 lifters. It's just not the case.
Yeah.
So, and the thing is, if I can get the kids in reasonable shape, really good shape, and I get their legs a little stronger and their upper body's a little bigger, we're going to be okay. We're going to be very good.
Yeah.
And the other thing you have to understand too, let's just take it from a team sport. Okay. Let's say I got 50 guys in the team. And then you're going to have the few outliers, right? The guys who are just fucking freaks. Guys who 6'3", 250 can run like a 4.5, jump through the roof. Well, strength training is going to help them, but you're going to be freaks regardless of what you do. You see that at high levels of sport. It doesn't really matter that much. But my goal is to take the kid who's kind of the average kid. If I can make him a little stronger, a little better, and it's like I told this one strength coach after a game, I said, my goal is just make my average guy kick your average guy's ass all over the place. If I take because most of the players are going to be average kids. That's just the way it works because they're average. So if I can just make them a little stronger, a little more durable, and give them a little more confidence, it's, the freaks are always going to be freaks. So, I guess it's more catered to the average person than anything else. So,
yeah,
I should say that's where you're going to make the biggest impact.
Yeah, and I guess in team sports, there's no point just having a few freaks. Obviously that helps, but you need everyone. If you can increase your average of the whole squad, if you improve that, then that's
all of
where
a sudden
it's
you got a bench warmer coming off and kicking ass.
Yeah,
and it's like, and I've seen it happen dozens of times. Now you take I don't know how many people are going to understand this, but like college football in America is fucking massive, and you have maybe 5 or 6 teams that over the past 20 years are always just good. Even in their bad year, they lose like three games. You're like, like what a shitty year. And they have a constant flood of great athletes just coming in, no matter what. Just every year they get new guys come in who are just insane. And they always say like, well, what are these teams doing? And it's like, well, does it really matter? I want to see what the team is doesn't have the good recruits. What are they doing to be able to compete with these teams? So. But it's you always want to look at what the winners are doing, but you have to understand: are they just winning because they're great, at what they do, or they're winning because they're training?
Yeah.
So
No, this is a question we ask all the guests on the podcast now. I know you're not working with rugby players, so you might want to just sort of aim it at your guys. But what is the biggest mistake rugby players make when it comes to strength and conditioning?
Well, I'm going to assume that they the same mistakes are made here as they're over there for rugby as they are for football. I think one is, like I said, I think they put the cart before the horse. I think how do I put? They're probably using more advanced methods than they should. I think a lot of guys, they overtrain the shit out of them. In America, I think some of the models are broken as far as, and I'll give you an example, and I don't know if this is going to hold true, but you guys have your rugby season, and then you guys have your off season. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Is that okay? I assume it's so. After the football off season, the kids usually get 2 or 3 weeks off, and then they go into their off season training mode. And at this point, because they're so far away from the season, they do some pretty insane conditioning stuff. Okay. And they're doing kids are running everywhere. They're throwing up. They're doing all this shit. Well, when do you don't need to be in the best shape of your life 9 months before the football season, right?
Yeah.
And that's when you're least prepared to do all this stuff. So, for example, at the end of a rugby season, you're only conditioned to play whatever position you have. Okay. So even if you're a starter, you're only conditioned to do what you're supposed to do during the game. And that's it. You take a couple weeks off in the best running conditioning shape in the world. So I think that their periodization model, their planning model gets a little screwed up. They do the conditioning when they're least ready.
Yeah.
And so when our guys, we condition year round, we train 51 weeks out of the year. We take 1 week off after the season. The reason why we're able to do this is because we don't run our kids in the ground at all.
Yeah.
So we're able to, it's kind of like studying for a test. You can either cram all in one night and retain nothing, or you can study 10 or 15 minutes a day and we're good. And so, our conditioning during the first, 5 or 6 months of the off season maybe takes 15 minutes, 20 minutes, but we do it. We always do it no matter what. We find something to do. And I think that is one of the biggest things is I'll give you an example. Let's say you don't condition at all. And then towards the end of the off season, now it's like, fuck, you kind of have to play catch up. Now your lifting goes into shitter. And so because you've been running so much, now you can't really train as much. But if you run a little bit every single time you train, or however you guys do it, or how the team does it, then you don't have to play catch up at all. You just have to maybe add a little bit here and there, and you're lifting, and your kids are able to stay stronger, and stay. The body weight stays the same. They're not. I don't know if that makes sense, but is always the best. So
yeah, definitely.
And yeah, so I can go on and on about this shit, but the one thing I've kind of learned is I don't really care too much what everyone else is doing because I have no control over it. And so me and the head coach, and that's another thing. I think these strength coaches really need to work together with the head coach. They need to come up with a plan. And that's one of the things is that the head coach of the football team and I are really good friends. I didn't know him before I started, but we developed an insane amount of trust in each other. And so, we'll talk about stuff. I'm like, man, listen, after watching the kids warm up before practice, I'm like, you're going to have to cut this practice short. The kids they're exhausted right now. So instead of beating them in the ground, trying to be all old school, like we're fucking Navy SEALs, bitches. It's like, we need to be smart about this. And does that make sense? Like,
yeah.
I don't know how the coaching is there, but in American football, there's still this mentality of we're going to outwork you, not outsmart you. I'd rather outsmart a team. And as we don't condition after practice, which is pretty normal in American football. You go through a whole 2-hour practice, and at the end you run sprints to stay in shape. Well, our practice is because we don't have a lot of kids out. The kids are already running for 2 hours.
Yeah.
What is an extra fucking 30 minutes of running with your head cut off going to do other than make them tired?
Yeah.
So we cut all that shit out. And it sounds ridiculous. Like, it sounds kind of common sense, but it's not here because that's what everyone does. So like our first year, we're like, shit, we're going to be okay. And all of a sudden, like, our kids are performing so well on Friday. And my big thing that I tell everyone is, let's say your name's Jamie, right?
Yeah.
Jamie? Okay. Jamie, let's say we had a bench press contest on Friday night. That's when we play our games, right? So would it be advisable for you and me to train heavy and do a shit ton of reps Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday?
No.
If we're going to max out on Friday? No. You gotta kind of prepare for it. So why wouldn't you treat your players the same way? So that's really working with the head coach. Now, sometimes you got to kick your kids in the ass, and you have to know when to do that. But like, everything we plan around is how can we make the kids ready for football season, for the actual game. It's not trying to fulfill some egotistical thing of no one works harder than us. And I always say, well, no one works smarter than us.
Yeah.
Go ahead. And I saw it firsthand. I mean, you see it even early on in the season. Kids are just fucking exhausted.
Yeah.
From all the crazy 2-a-days and there's 4-hour practices in the sun. It just doesn't work like that. So
yeah, definitely. I think two points there. The one is, if you train really hard, then you've got to recover from it, and so you can't do those hard sessions. Or if you do, the actual performance level of them decreases over time. Whereas if you
keep on digging that fucking hole,
yeah.
You can't.
Whereas if you train
right?
smart, you have that recovery, and you have more sessions where the intensity of it, increases, improves, kind of goes the other way. And then the other thing is, carry on.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
The other thing is that relationship with the coaches. It comes up often with the guests on the podcast that having that relationship, because ultimately and you've said it already, we drive the rugby performance or the sports performance, not just the stuff in the gym.
Yeah, the main goal is to kick ass on a game day, right?
Yeah.
So let's work together. I don't. If something needs to change, I don't get all mad because it's not what I wanted. I'm like, fuck, if the kids need it, man, I'll do anything. I don't care. And what was the other thing? Shit. Oh, yes, even we account for the other stressors. I'll give you an example is the first couple days of school, the kids always, it's a new stimulus. It's a new stressor. The kids are in class for 6 to 8 hours or however the long school is. And so we account for that because the first year we're like, man, what's wrong with the kids? I'm like, dumbass. Like, we're sitting around. I'm like, shit, it's first day of school. Of course, they're, even though it's not stressful, like they're in fucking war or something, it's something new.
Yeah.
So you have to kind of account for that stuff.
Yeah. And I guess exams and stuff like that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's in a lot of it is pretty common sense stuff. And a lot of it can be, you don't need, an advanced degree in neuroscience to understand, like, kids are a little down right now, who knows why. And, but however the reason, we need to be smart about this. And, so I don't know. I guess one of the things that after our really bad season, the head coach and I really just brainstormed, like, we got to fucking do something different. And I don't know if you're familiar with the show Seinfeld.
Yep. Yep.
There's a character in Seinfeld, George Costanza, who's kind of like the lovable loser. And one episode, he decides to do everything the opposite. Everything. He ends up with like a higher paying job, a super hot girlfriend. He gets a raise. Like, everything just goes his way. And that was my thing. I was like, let's just do everything the opposite. Fuck it. Can't get any worse. So we started really thinking, like, I call it, you can't serve old ghosts and dead ideas. Why do we do this? Is it because it's what's always been done, or is it because it actually serves a purpose? And when we start looking at that, you're like, man, that's kind of fucking stupid. Let's not do that anymore. And so we started doing things a little bit differently. One of the big things in American football is we have 2-a-days and 3-a-days for about 2 weeks. This is prior to school starting, so the kids would practice 2 or 3 times a day. And the old line of thinking was, this was before we had strength and conditioning and all this shit, was the kids need to get in shape. This is the first time they've been doing anything. Okay, so we need to get the kids ready for the upcoming season. Well, we already do that 51 weeks out of the year. So why are we practicing 2 or 3 times a day? That doesn't make any sense. So we cut that out. We just practice once a day. That's it. Yeah. And our kids are like, man, we feel good. I'm not exhausted. I didn't lose 30 pounds, from running around. And I was like, well, and so that becomes now the sport coaches now have to become better coaches. Like, listen, we have limited time now. So let's just figure out a way to coach this so the kids get it right away instead of just screaming and yelling and doing all the bullshit. Like, does this drill mean something, or is we just doing this to make the kids tired? And I'm not saying there's not a reason for doing some of that stuff, but you got to have a reason to do everything you do on the coaching field. Now, that's a little bit outside as I'm not a football coach or anything. But, again, when I'm strength coaching, I have to look at everything like, well, why am I doing this? Like, is there a reason, or is it just because everyone else is doing this shit?
Yeah.
And so, like, even when I started with the program with our kids, it took me about a year, and it's like having like a big stone tablet, like a massive 8-foot, and you just start chiseling shit away that you don't need. So you're carving a statue. So I look at everything. I'm like, well, what's the real fucking point of this? Do we really need this? And so I went from, maybe, 15 exercises all the way down to 7. And with everything I looked at, I'm like, well, what's the real reason why we're doing this? And if it didn't, I couldn't really justify it. I'm like, let's fucking throw it out. Who cares? Because all it is wasting time. It's very similar to what Abajev did in the Bulgarian system. He started off years ago with, I think, 15 or 20 exercises. By the time he left the system, they did clean and jerks, snatches, and front squats. That was all they did.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying to advocate for doing nothing, but that's not what I'm saying. Like, fuck it, we're just going to squat. No, but you have to have a reason for everything. If it doesn't, fuck it, throw it out. So,
yeah.
That, I'm telling you, that takes a shitload of maturity, by the way.
Yeah.
Because the smarter you are, the more you can justify anything. Right? Like, oh, we need side laterals. Like, do you really need side? And then you could justify it. Like, well, with the brachialis, blah, 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 blah. You're like, yeah. So, The other thing that we noticed too, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Is we had a massive decrease in concussions. Massive. Now, part of it might be the training, the way that we train our upper backs and our neck. But also part of it is the kids are less fatigued. When you're less fatigued, your head doesn't slump down. You don't, you have some body tension when you're hitting. But we went from like 7 or 8 concussions one year to 1.
Wow.
And, concussions and shit are going to happen in football, and I assume rugby too.
Yeah, it's quite a hot topic at the moment. It seems to be increasing.
Everyone's bitching and moaning about that. But just by changing our training, and not just what we do, it's what we don't do, that I think actually helps our kids. And in that course of training, over the years, we've only had, I don't think we've had any real injuries other than like freak shit that's just going to happen naturally. Because, football and I assume rugby, it's 100% injury potential. I tell the kids all the time, you're going to get hurt. Like, you don't bash people in the fucking head and come out without a broken finger or, something bruised or something. So, but I think that has a lot to do with not just the training, but with the recovery aspect of being smart about it. So,
yeah. No, that's interesting. Now, obviously, dealing with young athletes, what are your approaches to them or advice for them around nutrition?
That gets a little hairy because I don't control their nutrition.
Okay.
And that also gets into an economic thing too.
Right, okay.
But it does because you have some families who just don't have a lot of money, and it just kind of stinks. The first thing I tell them is you're going to have to eat and I know this goes against all the fucking organic jerker offers. I just want you to have calories first. If that's all you can afford, just get something in your body. And if you think that's ridiculous, I've seen in college. I remember my strength coach in college said this. They had some nutritionists come in and said something about, well, do you guys eat, promote vegetables and stuff? And he looked at her. He's like, what the fuck are you talking about? He's like, if our kids eat a large pizza and drink beer, I'm fucking happy because at least they're.
Wow.
Main thing is the kids just need to eat. Okay. Yeah. So before we go into all the macronutrient bullshit, that's the reality of the situation, and then people don't want to accept it. So instead of talking about organic chicken, just say, you know what, it's probably. So number one thing is I tell the kids to eat. Number two, you can control what time you wake up and what you eat for breakfast, because that's something you can control. Because so I said, just at the very least, have as big of a breakfast as you can, because you can get up early, you can make eggs are cheap, you can have some oatmeal. I don't give a shit, but it's got to be some kind of protein. I want some kind of fat, and then enjoy whatever carbs you want. And then at dinner, the kids usually do a pretty good job at dinner. With the lunch stuff, it gets a little hairy, but even with some of the kids who have trouble, I just tell them, listen, can you bring some string cheese? Can you bring some peanut butter and jelly sandwiches to, between your classes? Because some of these kids are so skinny. It's, again, an extra 1,000 calories, which is about 2 peanut butter sandwiches and jelly sandwiches, makes a huge difference. Because if you don't do that, then let's say they don't eat breakfast, they barely eat lunch, they're not even eating until dinner time, and that's just not going to cut it. So it's more of about control your breakfast, because you can get that in. Try to eat something throughout the day and snack, between classes and stuff. And then at dinner, just eat as much as you can. And the other thing is, I tell the kids to salt their food, which the kids that listen seem to do a pretty good job of it. We had one kid went full on vertical diet by Stan Efferdine. Holy shit, did he get big and strong. Holy cow. Unbelievable. This was a kid, though, that you tell him to do anything, he's like, fuck it, I'll do it. I don't give a shit. And he watched, he got the book, watched all the videos, and figured it out, and just completely committed to it. And, it was insane. So, but you're not going to get all the kids like that.
Yeah.
That's just not the reality. And so I guess the main thing is you got to eat, and just eat breakfast. That's the number one things I say.
Cool. Okay, Jim, another question we ask all the guests on the podcast is, what advice would you give to an upcoming strength coach?
Oh, boy. I think the number one thing, there's two things I would say. One is strength train yourself. Understand what it feels like to have a bar on your back, understand what it's like to feel fatigued. As an example, remind me that I have a second point here.
Yeah.
As an example, let's say I didn't train at all right now, right? For the last 10 years, I didn't really do anything. So I go in, I coach the team, and I think a lot of people tend to romanticize their past. So I'd say something like, man, when we pushed the prowler or did sleds, we did it till we died, all this shit. And they lose this sight that this shit's fucking tough sometimes. Like, your legs are tired. And so I still do stupid shit to myself all the time. So I understand what the kids are going through. I can I can be empathetic to their situation, that sometimes after you squat, doing sprints sucks. I think that's the number one thing, is you have to understand kind of how the body works, and understand it by using your own body. And number two, for young guys, I think you have to do some kind of internship under someone. And it doesn't have to be under the greatest coach in the world. Just learn something. And if you don't learn what to do, you learn what not to do. Now, I guess it's kind of hard to say, like, what do you consider a strength coach? I always consider a strength coach in charge of teams. That's different than a personal trainer. As a strength coach, you have to know a lot, but you also have to be a very good communicator. You have to understand how to develop personal relationships with people. I think no one ever talks about that. Like, what does it matter if I know how to program if I don't know how to coach?
Yeah.
If I don't know how to teach the basic lifts, if I don't know how to communicate with my athletes, if I don't know how to understand each kid, and some kids, respond a little bit differently. How do I know, like, if I'm in a room of 50 kids, I can't get all their attention and respect when I need to get something done. So I think all that stuff, and that's something you can learn, because it'd be the first time I ever went in front of 50 kids. I'm nervous as shit, right? Because you have to learn how to control an audience. It's much like being like a stand-up comedian. Like, I can imagine how tough it can be. So I think you need to intern or We have graduate assistants over here, and just get your foot in the door that way, because no matter what you think, whatever job in the world it is, it's always about who you know. And if you get your foot in, you continue your education with training and stuff, you'll get many more opportunities than just sitting on the sideline posting pictures on Instagram and wonder why no one gives a shit about you. So, and then of course, you're going to have something of substance. You can only operate so long on your 6-pack abs. Like, you got to be willing. You have to be good. It's like years ago, I was sitting around one time and I was talking to these people, and they were talking about, writing books on the internet and getting an audience and stuff. And I'm sitting there listening to everyone. I'm like, no one really mentioned having a good product. Isn't that pretty much the best thing you could do, is have a kick-ass product and then learn how to market it? Because, and I'll give you another good example, is someone asked me recently about girls on Instagram showing their asses and their tits and all that stuff, right? And like, well, it's hard to compete with like another female was saying, well, it's hard to compete with that. And I said, listen, like, they're going to get more likes, and I get it, but that's not a sustainable business model for someone who's serious about this. You're going to last until you're 30 or 35, and then it's just going to be a lot of weird filters, and it's just not a sustainable business model. So you still need something of substance, and a lot of that comes with just, again, getting yourself in front of people, training, understanding coaching. So, I kind of lucked out on, I don't want to say I lucked out, because I worked fucking hard. Like, I was obsessive about all this stuff. But I think, it favored me because I worked so hard. Like, when the opportunities came, I jumped on them because I was ready, So, and it's taken, so I have a very obsessive personality. I know you don't know me, but it's borderlines on weird. And I think it does. I mean, luckily my parents were very good about it. Like, well, that's who you are. And they still can't believe I was able to make a living doing this. Like, I couldn't fucking shut you up. So that's taken me, 30 years. And someone asked me, I've been doing this for 5 years. I'm like, dude, 5 years, I was 18. And I didn't know shit. I wouldn't trust myself, trust the team to me when I was 18. So it just takes time, man. And so I guess, again, a part of it has changed because of social media. And part of it's like, I don't know what people define as a strength coach anymore. I think maybe my definition is a little bit different than just an online trainer or whatever. But training is a whole nother ballgame when you personal train, because that's very difficult too.
Yeah.
So.
No, tons of great advice. Sorry.
Yeah, training, you got to sit there and listen to fucking people. It's like, I don't care.
No, tons of great advice there. And are there any books or resources you'd recommend? Anything that?
Yeah, I it's books and shit like that.
Yeah.
Or
anything that sort of opened doors for you, change your thinking about stuff.
No.
There's an opportunity to say your own stuff then, but
yeah. I mean, that would be hypocritical because the majority of my knowledge came from training and observing. One of the great things I did when I was a kid was shutting up a little bit and watching. And so, of course, I was reading. But the other thing I think people do a little bit with reading is they read too many books instead of reading one book 30 or 40 times. And I think that's when things start settling in a little bit. At least with me, I've probably read the same book, 8,000 times. I don't know. I'm making that up. But I just think that I'll never forget this. We hired like this. We bought a property next to our house, and it was just shitty. So we had to hire a company to come bulldoze a lot of the shit off there and level it out. And they planted some grass seed and stuff. And the guy that did it, he's like, dude, I didn't realize who you were. My friend's a huge fan. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. And he's like, he said, well, my buddy reads like 3 books a week. How long you been doing this stuff? The landscaping and shit. He's like, 25 years I've been doing it. I'm like, how much did you learn from reading a book? And he's like, and he looked at me, he's like, shit. Should I tell my buddy this? I'm like, no. So most of your knowledge is really going to come from doing, action, whether that be coaching or training yourself. And, even when I was at Westside, I would just watch Louis and I'd watch the other lifters, and you could learn a ton just from observing and knowing what to look for. And when I was coaching at the University of Kentucky, the same thing. You kind of sit back and observe and see all the different coaches. When you go to seminars and stuff, like it was always interesting because when you go to like these big conventions, bullshit stuff, it's like a lot of people just slapping each other on the back because they have the same ideas. And when I listen, I'm like, well, I'm always listening for the one thing that I don't understand or maybe I'm not that good with. I'm like, oh, okay, I see what he's doing there. And I think one of the things is I'm very principled in how I live my life and how I do my programming. And so when I hear an outside idea, I don't trash everything that I already believe in because I know what I do works. I'm just like, well, how does this fit into what I do and how can I work with that? And if you have a solid base of belief, you can take in any kind of information and implement it without throwing away everything.
Yeah.
It's like becoming like one year you're a fucking Christian, another year you're a Buddhist, another year you're a Muslim, another you're an atheist. It's like, man, you got to have some kind of belief system and then work from it. So.
Yeah, no, definitely great advice. And then Jim, lastly, where can people hear more from you, learn more about you, and have you got anything coming up you want to talk about? Is it North of Vag lifting competition? Is that right? Am I?
Yeah.
I've been teed up a bit.
That was a friend of mine, Phil Stevens, has been bugging me for years about doing something. And a bunch of my buddies, two of my best friends, we would do our own little old man meets. They'd all fly in here, and it's just an excuse for a bunch of friends to get together and lift, and then we just like eat shitty food and watch movies. It's like sleepaway camp for old dudes. So we started doing that, and it was awesome because like there was no rules. It was just like I want to try and deadlift 500 for 5. That's my goal. So it wasn't like we had a strict competition or anything. So it kind of caught on a little bit, and then my buddy Phil, he's been pestering me for years about doing something, and so we're doing a meet in Kansas, that's where Phil has an amazing gym there. He does a tremendous job, and we got like tons of food trucks. We got the beer vendors. We have cash prizes. We have. And we're like doing the Buffalo bar, which is the slight cambered bar. Yeah. Doing that as a squat. We're doing the press, the strict press, the standing press, and we're doing the trap bar deadlift as our lifts. And there's no weight classes and there's no gender classes. It's just everything's by coefficient. So we kind of removed all the bullshit that I think is kind of horrible. Not horrible. It's just everything just was a fucking nightmare. And I just want people to have fun again with lifting. That was one of the things that we did here. It's like there's no real rules. Just you perform at the standards and you tell your buddies what the standards are, and they'll say, hey, they look pretty good. It's like when I see a guy bench press 500 in meet and maybe comes up a little crooked, gets turned down. It's like, I still bench 500. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, as far as I'm concerned, that guy bench 500. So it's more about just enjoying the process of lifting and training and stuff like that. And then we have the website, jimwendler.com. We have blog updates maybe once a week. I think my wife does 1 or 2 newsletters a month. I don't like to smash people with stuff because that would drive me nuts. And one thing I've prided myself on is we try to do a very good job of being honest and not being salesy. I know my audience and I know what I like. I'm a very, I do like maybe one Instagram post every 2 weeks and stuff. So sometimes I do Q&As on there, which are incredibly fun for me because it's just, I'm sure you're on Instagram. I can't type that fast on Instagram. You can't give massive answers. So forces me to be very fun. Like, does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
I have a blast on that stuff, just kind of being, whoever I am. So I don't know. I guess my final words is I hope people find some kind of peace and purpose wherever they are, whatever they're doing. I hope they enjoy their freedom. That's something I love more than anything, is having the freedom of being where I am right now, living where I am right now. It's awesome. So I wouldn't give this shit up for anything. So, and the other thing, I guess, is the best. I tell this to the kids. I said, if anything, let me be a role model that you don't have to follow so-called the traditional route to happiness. I was able to find my own happiness. So I don't know.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jim. We'll of course share links to your Instagram and your website in the show notes, of course. But thank you for your time. It's been great talking to you. Some great insights. Sir. And all the best with everything in the future.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, Jamie. I appreciate you having me on. Okay.
Cheers, Jim. So there you go, another great podcast. Hope you enjoyed it. Of course, if you did, and if you know anyone you think you would find it helpful and enjoy it as well, please share it with them. We'd like to thank Jim for coming on the podcast. Some great insights and work he's doing and the program he's created. I love the bit about how kind of going against the status quo just because all the other teams do extra conditioning at the end of a session. If they felt they wouldn't get anything out of it, they canned it, and they actually found that players were fresher, staying injury-free, being able to train more regularly and perform better. So, might be worth looking at what you're doing. Are you doing it just because that's what everyone does? Are you actually getting things out of it? It's really important to keep looking at what you're doing, your programs, your processes, and see how you can tweak them, and whether you're just doing things for the sake of it or whether you're really getting things out of it. So some great points there. And of course, to hear more podcasts, please subscribe to us and give us a 5-star review on SoundCloud, Stitcher, iTunes, TuneIn, Spotify, whatever you listen to podcasts on. Make sure you don't miss any more upcoming podcasts. And of course, check us out at rugbyrenegade.com. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to the Rugby Renegade Podcast. For more quality rugby strength and conditioning information, check us out at rugbyrenegade.com. Rugby Renegade, building machines.